The last thing my house manager said to me was, "Mrs. Marquez, do not go back home. Open the security cameras." I was still sitting in the airport parking lot. I had just watched my son disappear past security. And what I saw on my phone 3 minutes later is the reason 4 people are now under federal investigation. If you believe older women become irrelevant after retirement, stay with me. And if you value truth over comfort, please like and subscribe, because what I'm about to share is not drama, it's documentation. My name is Alina Marquez. I am 63 years old. I am a retired forensic risk analyst, widow of 6 years, and co-founder, though most people forget this part, of MedLedger Analytics, the healthcare data firm my son now runs. I designed the company's internal compliance architecture before I ever decorated its first office. I also designed the audit triggers that no one remembers exist. I believe one thing above all: access leaves fingerprints. That morning, June 3rd, I drove my son Gabe to everyone who loves him, to the airport for his 6-week fellowship in Zurich. Gabe is 38, idealistic, brilliant with algorithms, and dangerously trusting. He believes growth solves everything. He believes delegation empowers people. He had just finalized an international expansion deal and left operational restructuring in the hands of his executive team while he was abroad. That detail matters. My daughter-in-law Vanessa, his wife, was already texting him before we even reached the drop-off lane. Vanessa is 34, formerly a lifestyle influencer who reinvented herself as MedLedger's brand strategist. She understands optics the way I understand audit trails. She believes image is leverage. I hugged my son at departures. He smelled like the cologne his father used to wear. "It's 6 weeks, Mama," he said. "Adrian has everything under control." Adrian Keller, 45. Recently hired chief financial strategist. Ivy League educated, polished, persuasive. He'd been pushing what he called modern governance modernization. Translation: rapid capital restructuring. I watched my son disappear through security at 8:12 a.m. At 8:17 a.m., my phone rang. "Mrs. Marquez," Mrs. Teresa Ibarra said quietly. Teresa has managed our household for 11 years. Before that, she worked as a paralegal. She notices procedural irregularities the way other people notice weather changes. Her voice was steady but too careful. "Yes, Teresa," I asked. "Do not come home." Silence. "Open the security app." I didn't ask questions. When someone like Teresa says something is procedural, not emotional, you listen. I opened the camera system I personally installed after my husband died. 14 angles. Cloud-backed, time-stamped. The live feed from my late husband's private office came up first. The room was supposed to be locked. I froze. Vanessa was inside, my daughter-in-law wearing latex gloves, standing beside my husband's old walnut desk. And she was not alone. Adrian Keller stood near the wall-mounted data cabinet, the one that houses physical backups of early shareholder agreements. He was holding a small black case. I zoomed in. He removed one of the external hard drives and replaced it with another. Vanessa was photographing the interior of file drawers. Then she pulled out a thick blue binder, the original equity allocation ledger from the company's founding year. She flipped through it, removed 3 pages, and slid them into her tote bag. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I enlarged the time stamp. 8:21 a.m., 4 minutes after my son's flight departed. Timing is rarely accidental in corporate misconduct. Teresa's voice came back softly through my Bluetooth. "They've been in there since 7:58. Mr. Keller brought a case." "Who unlocked the office?" I asked. "Mrs. Marquez, the lock code changed at 7:42 a.m. I felt something settle in my chest. Not panic, recognition. I had embedded a silent system flag years ago. Any executive-level code modification triggered a passive data duplication protocol in the cloud archive. They didn't know that. They wouldn't. Vanessa stepped aside so Adrian could photograph the underside of the desk, the small compartment where we stored early capitalization certificates. "They're replacing something else," Teresa whispered. "The small silver drive from the lower drawer." I switched camera angles. She was right. My husband's old backup drive gone, replaced. If you are a woman watching this, understand something. Betrayal rarely begins with emotion. It begins with access, and access is always logged somewhere. "Do they know you're home?" I asked Teresa. "No, they think I left at 7:30. Good, stay out of sight, do not intervene. And Teresa, yes, delete nothing. I ended the call and leaned back in the airport parking lot. My son was in the air, unaware that while he crossed the Atlantic, someone was altering governance records beneath his name. I reviewed another feed, the hallway camera outside the office. Vanessa and Adrian emerged at 8:34 am. Vanessa adjusted her hair. Adrian placed the black case back into his leather briefcase. They were calm, comfortable, not rushed. That is when I knew this was not impulsive. This was structured. I did not drive home. I drove to the Marriott across the highway and booked a room under my maiden name. From there, I opened my laptop and logged into the dormant compliance server I had architected 8 years earlier, the one only I could manually activate. Within 3 minutes, I saw it. A pending amendment draft filed at 7:51 am. Proposal, temporary share redistribution for governance efficiency. My shares, the silent majority shares I never sold, were flagged for temporary voting suspension due to inactivity. I had attended every annual board meeting, but retirement makes people assume disengagement. They were attempting stock dilution in real time. Adrian Keller specializes in majority control acquisitions. If my shares were frozen under a procedural technicality and Vanessa's leveraged options activated, control could quietly shift before Gabe landed in Zurich. And if I were declared cognitively compromised, my access rights could be legally challenged. I searched deeper. There it was. A draft petition template not filed yet requesting review of majority shareholder competency due to advanced age and disengagement. My lips curved slightly. They were not just restructuring equity, they were building a narrative. Age, inactivity, cognitive drift. Ladies, if you are over 50, listen carefully. Underestimation is not an insult, it is camouflage. At 9:42 am, my phone vibrated again. This time it was Adrian. Elena, he said warmly, just wanted to make sure you got home safely. Gabe mentioned you'd be resting. I decided to stay near the airport for breakfast, I replied calmly. Oh, that's unusual. So is unlocking my husband's office without informing me. Silence, then a measured chuckle. We're modernizing documentation for the board. Nothing for you to worry about. I never worry without documentation, I said. Enjoy your morning, Adrian. I hung up first, then I made 3 calls. First, Marcus Liu, a forensic accountant who once testified before the SEC. Marcus, I said, if someone were attempting quiet equity dilution using procedural amendments, how quickly could we trace pre-filed drafts? He paused. Within hours if you still have server imprint authority. I do. Then we move before they file. Second, Agent Danielle Brooks' white-collar division. I did not accuse, I did not dramatize. I simply said, hypothetically, if board-level securities manipulation were in progress, would you prefer early-stage documentation or post-filing? She answered without hesitation. Early stage, they talk more before filing. Good. Third, Rafael Cortez, investigative journalist. Rafael, I said, when is the best time to expose a governance takeover? He replied, right after they think it succeeded. Exactly. I sat in that hotel room until noon reviewing logs. At 12:07 p.m., an automatic alert triggered. Adrian had scheduled an emergency board dinner for Friday. Attendance mandatory. Including Harrison Cole, the board chairman, including Elaine Whitcomb, company counsel. They were accelerating, which means they were nervous. And nervous professionals make procedural mistakes. I leaned back and watched the camera replay again, Vanessa removing pages from the founding ledger. She believed documentation could be edited like a brand narrative, but she forgot something. Originals are mirrored, always. I picked up my phone and called Teresa. They left. Yes. Good. Do not restore anything. Let them believe the swap worked. What are you going to do, Mrs. Marquez? I looked out at the runway where another plane was lifting into the sky. I am going to let them finish. Because when people think they've succeeded, they document their victory. And when they document it, I collect it. And what they said at that Friday board dinner is what will dismantle them completely. By the time my son's plane landed in Zurich, the narrative about me had already begun forming inside board-level emails. Not explicitly, not boldly, but subtly enough to survive legal review. That's how professionals do it. They don't attack you, they redefine you. I remained at the airport hotel until evening, watching the back-end compliance dashboard I had written 8 years earlier. Most executives forget legacy architecture. I don't. At 2:14 p.m., a draft board memo appeared in the pre-filing queue. Author, Adrian Keller, our chief financial strategist. Subject, governance optimization during transitional leadership absence. Transitional leadership absence. That was their phrasing for my son Gabriel being overseas. I read slowly. He proposed temporary voting reallocation to prevent legacy majority stagnation. Legacy majority, that was me. I founded MedLedger with my late husband. I still hold the controlling silent block. But silence makes people assume surrender. At 3:02 p.m., Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, replied to the internal memo thread. Optically, this aligns with market expectations. Stability messaging is critical while Gabe is abroad. Optics. She always chooses optics over structure. Vanessa believes perception creates reality. I believe documentation survives reality. At 3:47 p.m., a second system alert triggered. Someone attempted to override dormant compliance protocols. That meant Adrian had discovered a barrier. Good. If you are a woman watching this, understand something important. When someone tries to accelerate a process quietly, it is usually because they believe resistance is minimal. Age, widowhood, retirement, these labels are often interpreted as weakness. They forgot I spent 32 years investigating multinational internal fraud. I called Marcus Liu at 4:10 p.m. They're initiating pre-vote dilution language, I told him. Marcus doesn't waste words. How fast? 48 hours before board presentation. Then they're confident or desperate. He paused. Pull the share movement preview? I did. And there it was. A conditional transfer clause if majority shares are deemed administratively inactive for 90 days, temporary oversight authority shifts to executive management. The 90-day clock, backdated, 90 days ago was the date of my so-called retirement reception. Clever, they were reframing celebration as disengagement. Marcus exhaled softly. Fraud accelerates before exposure. That's his belief. And he was right. At 5:26 p.m., I received a polite email from Elaine Whitcomb, our corporate attorney. Elaine has represented the board for 12 years. She represents stability, not loyalty. Alina, she wrote, there will be a strategic governance discussion Friday evening. Your attendance would be appreciated. Appreciated, not required. Another reframing. I replied within 2 minutes. I will attend. No explanation, no emotion, just confirmation. Then I called Agent Danielle Brooks. I did not dramatize. I never dramatize. Agent Brooks, I said, if an executive team were to manipulate share allocation under the guise of modernization, how much pre-filing documentation would you require to open inquiry? Her voice remained calm. Internal drafts, timestamp history, proof of backdating intent. I can provide all 3 by Friday. She didn't react. Professionals rarely do. We'll be listening. Listening. That word matters. That evening, I finally drove home. Teresa met me in the kitchen. They were confident, she said quietly. Mrs. Vanessa smiled when they left. I nodded. Confidence before consolidation is a pattern. Teresa understands systems even though she left law years ago. Are you going to tell Mr. Gabriel? She asked. I thought about my son, idealistic, brilliant, trusting. He trusts Adrian because Adrian speaks his language, expansion, leverage, growth curves. No, I said. Not yet. If I warned Gabe too early, he would confront emotionally. Emotion alerts predators. Silence confuses them. That night, I accessed the mirrored ledger archive. The pages Vanessa removed, already preserved digitally. Original signatures intact. Founding share ratios immutable. She took copies of something that cannot be erased. The next morning, Thursday, a new development. At 9:11 a.m., Adrian scheduled a closed-door executive session prior to Friday's board dinner. Attendees himself, Vanessa, Harrison Cole, our board chairman, and Elaine Whitcomb. Harrison Cole is 67, an early investor, old-school capitalist. He values stability above innovation. If Adrian convinced Harrison that I was inactive, Harrison would vote for temporary redistribution. And once that vote occurred, reversal would require litigation. That was their window. I called Rafael Cortez, the investigative journalist. Raphael, I said, how long does it take for a governance takeover story to trend? He laughed softly. Depends who leaks first. What if documentation exists before the vote? Silence. Then you don't leak before, you wait until after. Public humiliation is more effective than prevention. Exactly. That afternoon, I reviewed security footage again, not the office this time, but the hallway outside. Vanessa paused before leaving that morning, adjusted the painting on the wall, and smiled at her reflection in the glass. It wasn't triumph. It was relief. She believed the foundation had shifted. Women watching this understand something else. Impatience is louder than arrogance, and impatience leaves clearer footprints. At 2:38 p.m., Marcus sent me a forensic preview, the replacement hard drive Adrian installed. It pinged briefly through an offshore routing server before syncing locally. Sloppy. He thought replacing hardware erased metadata. It doesn't. Access leaves fingerprints. At 4:12 p.m., I received a text from my son. Landed. Meetings start tomorrow. Everything calm? I stared at that word. Calm, I replied. Everything is procedural. He sent a thumbs up emoji. Trusting. Still trusting. That night I prepared for Friday's dinner. I selected a navy dress, understated, not confrontational. Underestimation thrives on softness. I will give them softness. Teresa approached quietly. Mrs. Marquez, are you certain? I looked at her. They are about to document their own intent. She nodded. Then we let them. At 8:07 p.m., another alert triggered. Adrian uploaded the final draft of the redistribution memo. Clause 7. Majority shareholder Elena Marquez, having demonstrated prolonged disengagement, will temporarily transfer voting authority to executive oversight. Prolonged disengagement. I smiled slightly. I attended every quarterly review. I signed every capital authorization. I have time-stamped proof of each. Backdating leaves scars in metadata, and they forgot I built the archive. Before sleeping, I sent 3 secure packets. One to Marcus, one to Agent Brooks, one to Raphael. Each contained mirrored documentation with embedded timestamp verification. I did not accuse, I did not warn, I simply preserved. As I turned off the light, I thought about something my late husband once told me when we founded MedLedger. Most takeovers don't start hostile, he said. They start polite. Friday night would be polite, there would be wine. Controlled voices, strategic smiles, they will speak in phrases like modernization and alignment. They will mention my age gently, they will reference efficiency. They will believe I am walking into that dining room unaware. What they don't know, what none of them know, is that the moment Adrian presents that memo, a secondary compliance trigger activates automatically. And once that trigger activates, federal oversight becomes procedural, not emotional. They think I am attending a dinner. I am attending a deposition without them realizing it. And what Harrison Cole says after he sees the real numbers, that is what will determine who walks out confident and who walks out indicted. By Friday evening, they believed the structure had already shifted. That is the danger of quiet manipulation, the illusion of completion before confirmation. I arrived at my own home at 6:42 p.m. The dining room was set formally. Teresa had arranged everything with her usual restraint. She understands symbolism, no extravagance, just order. Harrison Cole arrived first. He has been with our company since the earliest investor round, 67 years old, cautious, conservative, suspicious of volatility. Elena, he said, kissing my cheek politely, good to see you engaged. Engaged, I smiled. I never disengaged, Harrison. He chuckled lightly, but I watched his eyes. He believed tonight was procedural. Vanessa entered next, glowing, composed, dressed in cream silk. She kissed my cheek gently. We've missed you at the office, Elena. She says things like that as if retirement equals absence. I looked at her calmly. I've been present in every quarterly filing. She blinked. Adrian arrived precisely at 7:01 p.m., leather portfolio in hand. Confident men love portfolios. They feel like evidence even when they contain none. Elaine Whitcomb followed him, careful, neutral, eyes scanning. Elaine never commits before proof. She represents the board, not affection. And then we sat. Wine poured, candles steady. My son was thousands of miles away believing his leadership team was preserving stability. If you are a woman watching this, understand something critical. Betrayal does not announce itself. It hosts dinner. Adrian began smoothly. Thank you all for attending. As you know, Gabe's temporary international engagement creates an opportunity to modernize governance. Opportunity, not risk. We've identified inefficiencies in voting allocation that may hinder expansion capital. I folded my hands. Specify inefficiencies, I said gently. He smiled. Legacy majority concentration. There it was. Harrison shifted slightly in his seat. Alina still holds majority control, he said carefully. Correct, Adrian replied. But active governance participation metrics show diminished executive engagement. Metrics. He was using analytics language against my own company. Vanessa leaned forward. It's about optics, Harrison. Investors respond better to agile boards. Optics again, always optics. I let the silence stretch. Silence makes people fill it. Adrian opened his portfolio and slid printed copies of the redistribution memo across the table. This proposal temporarily reallocates Alina's voting block to executive oversight during transitional inactivity. Transitional inactivity. Define inactivity, I asked. Adrian turned a page. Attendance decline, reduced operational involvement, and absence from restructuring meetings. I attended the April Capital Review, I said calmly. Yes, he replied smoothly, but not the May modernization session. The May session had been scheduled during my medical checkup. I had submitted written commentary. Written commentary constitutes formal engagement, I said. Elaine's pen paused midair. Good, she was listening. Harrison cleared his throat. Is this necessary? He asked. Expansion requires speed, Adrian replied. Consolidated oversight accelerates decisions. He was rushing leaves gaps. I reached into my own folder, thin, minimal. I placed 3 documents on the table, time-stamped attendance logs, digital signatures from every capital authorization in the past year. Server activity records showing my weekly compliance review access. Inactivity, I said quietly, is not supported by documentation. Vanessa's jaw tightened. With respect, Alina, governance is evolving. Governance does not evolve through backdating, I replied. The room shifted. Adrian's composure flickered barely. I'm not sure what you mean. I turned to Elaine. The draft memo uploaded Wednesday at 2:14 p.m. contains a backdated inactivity reference from 90 days prior. 90 days ago was my retirement reception, which was ceremonial, not legal. Elaine's eyes narrowed. Backdated, she repeated. Adrian responded quickly. Clerical formatting error. Clerical errors do not modify compliance clocks, I said. Then I placed the second document forward. Metadata trace logs. Server imprint timestamps. Evidence that the office hard drive had been swapped the morning my son left the country. Harrison leaned forward now. What is this? He asked. I looked at him directly. This is proof that governance documents were accessed and altered without board notification. Vanessa's voice sharpened. That's an accusation. No, I said evenly. It is documentation. The temperature in the room changed. Adrian's smile faded fully. You're suggesting malfeasance? He asked. I am suggesting procedural irregularity, I answered. That phrasing matters legally. Harrison turned toward Adrian. Were original ledgers removed? Silence. Small. But loud enough. Vanessa broke it. We were organizing historical archives. With latex gloves? I asked softly, her face flushed. Teresa from the doorway remained still as stone. She had seen everything. Elaine closed her folder slowly. If document access occurred without board resolution, she said, that requires explanation. Adrian adjusted his cufflinks, the smallest tell of discomfort. We were safeguarding company interests. Safeguarding, I repeated. By attempting temporary suspension of majority shares during the founder's absence? Harrison's voice hardened now. Alina founded this company, Adrian pivoted. We are protecting it from stagnation. Stagnation, I said quietly, is not the same as control. Then I did something deliberate. I turned my phone face up on the table. The compliance dashboard glowed softly. Clause 14 of our founding charter activates automatic federal notification if majority share manipulation is attempted without formal board vote. Adrian's pupils shifted. Vanessa inhaled sharply. You activated it? She asked. It activated itself, I replied, because I wrote it that way. Silence again, this one heavier. Elaine looked at me carefully. Who has been notified? Appropriate oversight, I said, which meant Agent Danielle Brooks was already reviewing preliminary files. Harrison leaned back, absorbing. Adrian, he said slowly, did you intend to move majority control tonight? Adrian's confidence cracked at the edges. We intended to modernize? Answer the question, Harrison pressed. He hesitated 1 second too long. That was enough. Vanessa stood abruptly. This is dramatic overreach, she snapped. Elena is paranoid about relevance. I looked at her with something almost maternal. Relevance does not require theft. Elaine's voice cut through softly. I recommend suspension of this proposal pending external review. There it was. Not victory, not yet, but hesitation, and hesitation is oxygen for truth. Adrian gathered his papers too quickly. We can revisit, he said, revisit, meaning retreat. Harrison looked at me again. You have proof of hard drive replacement? I nodded once. And of offshore server pings tied to the replacement device. That detail landed heavily. Offshore routing suggests concealment. Harrison's expression changed. Stability had just encountered risk. The dinner ended without dessert. No one lingered, no one toasted. Vanessa left without kissing my cheek. Adrian avoided eye contact entirely. Elaine paused at the doorway. You anticipated this, she said quietly. I anticipated access, I corrected. After they left, I remained seated at the table alone. Teresa approached slowly. Will they stop? She asked. I looked at the empty wine glasses. No, I said, they will accelerate. Because exposure makes desperate people move faster. My phone vibrated as if on cue. A message from Marcus, offshore routing confirmed. Funds connected to Adrian's consulting shell? That changed everything. Because governance manipulation is internal misconduct. Offshore concealment is federal territory. I stared at the message. The board had hesitated. But Adrian had already moved money, and that meant intent. And intent is harder to explain away than paperwork. I poured myself a glass of water, not wine. Clarity requires clarity. If you are a woman watching this, remember. Never interrupt someone mid-mistake. Let them complete it. Adrian believed tonight was a setback. He does not yet understand that the offshore trail he initiated is traceable. And when Agent Brooks requests transactional mapping Monday morning, he will realize the true mistake was not the vote attempt. It was assuming I would react emotionally. I never react emotionally, I document. And what I discovered at 1:17 a.m. when Marcus sent the second file, that is when this stopped being internal governance and became criminal conspiracy. At 1:17 a.m. when Marcus Liu sent the second file, I understood something fundamental. This was never about temporary voting power. It was about exit velocity. I opened the attachment at my kitchen table while the house was silent. Teresa had gone to bed, but I remained awake. Widows learn to sit comfortably with silence. The file showed a transaction cluster routed through a consulting entity tied to Adrian Keller. Not advisory fees, not performance bonuses. Pre-acquisition positioning capital. Structured in layered transfers broken into increments small enough to avoid automated compliance flags, except they forgot one thing. I wrote the compliance flags. Marcus called at 1:22 a.m. It's dilution prep, he said. He's positioning to absorb discounted shares once your block is temporarily neutralized. I didn't react immediately. Reaction wastes oxygen. Source of funds? I asked. Partially offshore, partially collateralized against Vanessa's private holdings. That detail landed differently. Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, my son's wife. Explain, I said. She leveraged personal debt against projected share appreciation. If control shifts, valuation spikes under acquisition narrative. She clears her debt instantly. So this wasn't just impatience, it was liquidity pressure. And liquidity pressure makes people reckless. If you are a woman watching this, remember, urgency is the fingerprint of hidden debt, financial or emotional. At 7:10 a.m., Gabriel texted from Zurich. Board dinner go well? I stared at the message longer than necessary. He trusts too easily, that is his kindness. Productive, I replied, not a lie, just incomplete. He sent back a photo of the Swiss skyline. He believes he is expanding global healthcare analytics. He does not yet know he nearly lost control of his own company. By 9:00 a.m., Agent Danielle Brooks requested a secure briefing. We met virtually at 10:30. Her demeanor was unchanged, calm, precise. Walk me through the sequence, she said. I did. Hard drive swap, backdated inactivity clause, attempted temporary reallocation, offshore routing tied to Adrian's consulting entity, collateralization against Vanessa's private debt. She did not interrupt. When I finished, she asked one question: did they formally present the vote? No, board hesitation stalled it. She nodded. Good. That preserves intent without completed transfer. Attempted securities manipulation carries different leverage. Leverage, she uses that word clinically. Will you move now? I asked. No, she said. We let them continue documentation? That is what disciplined investigators do. They allow arrogance to write the confession. At noon, Harrison Cole called unexpectedly. His voice sounded older than usual. Alina, he said, were you aware of offshore transfers connected to Keller? I am now, I replied. Silence. Then, I invested in this company because of your governance. That sentence mattered. Governance is intact, I said. For now, Harrison exhaled slowly. If this escalates publicly, valuation suffers. Stability again, always stability. If it escalates legally, I corrected gently, valuation survives. If it escalates criminally without intervention, it collapses. He understood the distinction. By 2:14 p.m., Adrian made his first visible mistake. He scheduled an emergency capital efficiency review with mid-level executives. Too fast, fraud accelerates before exposure. Marcus was right. Teresa entered my office at home quietly. He came by earlier, she said. Adrian? Yes, he asked if you seemed stressed. I smiled faintly. Concern from him is tactical. Teresa nodded. She sees tone shifts instinctively. Vanessa left after him, she added. She looked angry. Anger is different from fear. Anger believes it can still win. At 4:00 p.m., Marcus forwarded a pattern map. Adrian's offshore consulting entity was linked to 2 prior restructuring cases in other companies. In both, silent majority shareholders were diluted through temporary inactivity clauses. Legal on paper, predatory in execution. He specializes in transition phase acquisitions, Marcus said. Your son's overseas fellowship was ideal timing. Of course it was. This was never spontaneous. It was strategic. That evening, I requested a private meeting with Elaine Whitcomb at the corporate office. Neutral ground. Elaine arrived precisely on time, leather folder in hand. I assume this is not social, she said. Nothing I do is, I replied calmly. I showed her the transaction map, the hard drive metadata, the collateralization trail tied to Vanessa. Elaine's composure shifted slightly, not emotionally, but legally. If this is accurate, she said, the board must formally investigate. And if the board hesitates? I asked. She met my eyes. Then regulators will not. That was her quiet admission. She suspected. Now she had proof. As we left the building, I noticed Adrian's car still in the parking structure. Lights on in the executive suite. Accelerating, always accelerating. At 8:36 p.m., Rafael Cortez called. There's movement, he said. Financial blogs are whispering about MedLedger governance shifts. Too early, someone leaked. From where? I asked. Unclear, but the narrative suggests modernization resistance from a founding shareholder. Resistance. They are framing me as obstruction. Rafael paused. If you want, I can counterspin. No, I said immediately. Not yet. Timing matters more than volume. Public exposure before formal inquiry could look defensive. We wait. Late that night, I reviewed archived security footage from the office again. Vanessa entered Adrian's suite Wednesday evening carrying a slim black folder. She exited 30 minutes later without it. Intent documented. At 11:52 p.m., my phone vibrated. Unknown number, I answered. Mrs. Marquez? A male voice, controlled. Yes. This is Adrian Keller. Of course it was. I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I did not speak. Silence unsettles men like him. We're simply trying to strengthen the company during Gabriel's absence. By neutralizing founding shares? I asked evenly. He paused. Temporary oversight. For efficiency? Efficiency does not require concealment, I said. Another pause, then his tone sharpened slightly. Public escalation would harm everyone. There it was. A warning disguised as concern. I do not escalate publicly, I replied calmly. I escalate procedurally. I ended the call first. Teresa was standing in the hallway when I turned. She had heard enough to understand tone, if not words. He's nervous, she said quietly. Yes, I replied, and nervous professionals rush. The next morning, Sunday, Vanessa requested brunch, just the two of us. Interesting, we met at a cafe overlooking the bay. She arrived early, sunglasses large, posture composed. Elena, she began softly, this tension is unnecessary. Explain unnecessary, I said. She removed her glasses, her eyes were tired. We want growth. Gabe wants growth? Growth does not require dilution, I replied. She hesitated. You're holding too tightly. I studied her carefully. You leveraged personal debt against projected share value, I said quietly. Her face went still. Completely still, there it was, fear replacing anger. That's private, she whispered. Nothing is private when collateral intersects governance, I said. She looked away toward the water. Adrian said restructuring would protect us. Protect. The language of justification. Protect you from what? I asked gently. She did not answer because the answer was lifestyle, image, pressure, debt. I stood slowly. Vanessa, ambition without structure collapses. I left before she could reply. By Sunday evening, Agent Brooks confirmed preliminary federal interest. We are not intervening yet, she said. But if another transfer occurs, we move. And at 9:43 p.m., Marcus sent the alert I had been anticipating. Another offshore microtransfer, smaller than the first, but traceable, intent repeated. That repetition changed everything legally, because now it wasn't preparation, it was execution. I closed my laptop slowly. The board hesitated. Adrian accelerated. Vanessa panicked. Harrison recalculated. Elaine observed. Gabe remained unaware. And by Monday morning, when regulatory inquiries formally request transactional documentation from MedLedger Analytics, someone will realize that the majority shareholder they tried to sideline never stopped watching. They believed I was retired. They believed I was sentimental. They believed I would defend emotionally. Instead, I documented quietly. And when Agent Danielle Brooks sends her first official request for financial preservation orders, that is when this becomes irreversible. They thought they were restructuring governance. They were building evidence. And tomorrow they will find out which one matters more. Monday morning began quietly, too quietly. That is always the moment I pay closest attention. At 8:02 a.m., MedLedger's internal system generated a standard regulatory inquiry notice. It was routine in tone. Non-accusatory, clinical, request for preservation of financial records pending review of transactional irregularities. Agent Danielle Brooks had moved, but exactly as she promised, procedurally, not dramatically. I did not forward the notice to anyone. I waited. At 8:17 a.m., Adrian Keller logged into the executive portal. At 8:19 a.m., he attempted to initiate another capital efficiency transfer. The system denied it automatically. Preservation hold activated. That was the moment he understood something had shifted beyond board politics. At 8:23 a.m., Vanessa called him. I watched the office security feed remotely. Her posture was tight, his jaw locked. Accelerated fraud always believes it has one last window, until the window seals. At 8:41 a.m., I received the call I had anticipated. Adrian. Did you involve regulators? His voice was controlled but thinner now. The system involved regulators, I replied. Compliance triggers are automated. Silence. Then you're overreacting? No, I said calmly. You underestimated architecture. I ended the call. Teresa entered my study with tea as she has for 11 years. It has begun, she asked. Yes, I said. She nodded once. Teresa understands that the most powerful moments rarely look dramatic. They look administrative. At 9:05 a.m., Elaine Whitcomb emailed the board, all restructuring proposals are suspended pending review. That sentence carried more weight than any confrontation. Harrison Cole responded within minutes. Full financial transparency required immediately. Stability had shifted sides. By 10:12 a.m., Marcus Liu confirmed the second offshore microtransfer was frozen mid-route. He tried to move liquidity before the hold locked fully, Marcus said. Sloppy is what happens when pressure replaces patience. If you are a woman watching this, remember, once someone begins rushing, their precision dissolves. Precision is expensive. Panic is cheap. At 11:30 a.m., Gabriel called from Zurich. "Mom, I'm hearing odd things," he said. His voice still carried optimism, but uncertainty crept at the edges. "What have you heard?" I asked gently. "Adrian says there's regulatory noise, something about compliance misunderstandings." I chose my words carefully. "Gabe, governance is being reviewed, that is all." Silence. "Is this because I left?" he asked. There it was in misplaced guilt. "No," I said firmly. "This is because someone assumed oversight was optional." He exhaled slowly. "Should I come back? Not yet." Emotion would complicate documentation. He needed to remain uninvolved until evidence solidified. After the call, I allowed myself exactly 30 seconds of stillness. Being a mother and a majority shareholder requires compartmentalization. Love cannot override structure. At 1 p.m., Agent Brooks scheduled formal interviews for executive leadership. Voluntary at first, that word matters. Voluntary interviews often produce the most revealing statements. At 2:15 p.m., Vanessa attempted to access her collateral account. Denied. Liquidity freeze applied to assets connected to potential securities review. She called me at 2:17 p.m. Her voice was no longer polished. "Alina, what is happening?" "Documentation," I replied. "My personal accounts are restricted." "Because they intersected corporate leverage," I said calmly. "That's invasive." "That's governance," I corrected. There was a long silence on her end. "You could have talked to us," she whispered. "You could have talked to me," I answered softly. Intent reveals itself when people choose concealment over conversation. At 3:40 p.m., Adrian's attorney contacted Elaine. Defensive positioning had begun. But defense requires completed action, and his transfers were incomplete. That distinction would matter legally. "Harrison Cole called me at 4:05 p.m. I misjudged Keller," he admitted. Admission from a man like Harrison is rare currency. "You evaluated based on presentation," I said. "Presentation is not governance." He paused. "What happens now?" "Now we wait," I replied. Waiting is intolerable for those accustomed to control, but patience is power when the system is already engaged. At 5:30 p.m., Rafael Cortez messaged me. "Federal inquiry confirmed." Story circulating quietly among financial desks. He added, "Do you want narrative protection?" I considered. Public exposure could accelerate collapse, but timing remained critical. "Not yet," I replied. "Let the paperwork speak first." That evening, Teresa informed me Adrian had emptied his executive office of personal effects. Too soon. Flight before formal charge signals consciousness of guilt. Marcus texted minutes later. "He's attempting reputational insulation, likely claiming strategic misinterpretation." Of course he was. Professionals rarely admit intent. They recast it as innovation. At 8 p.m., I received the update from Agent Brooks. "Preliminary evidence suggests coordinated share manipulation attempt," she said. "If verified, this escalates to securities fraud and conspiracy." Her tone did not change. Mine did not either. "Understood," I replied. She added one more sentence. "Your compliance architecture preserved everything." That was the only acknowledgement I needed. Later that night, alone in my office, I opened the founding charter of MedLedger Analytics, the document my husband and I signed years ago at our dining table. We built systems to protect data integrity in healthcare. It never occurred to him that one day those same systems would protect our son from internal betrayal. If you are a woman watching this, here is the lesson. Build structures before you need them. Integrity written in advance survives manipulation later. At 10:47 p.m., Gabriel sent another message. "Adrian says this is temporary noise." I looked at that word, noise. Fraud always calls evidence noise. I typed slowly, "Noise fades, documentation remains." 3 minutes later, he replied, "I trust you." That trust mattered more than control ever could, but trust does not eliminate consequences. And consequences were now procedural. Because at 6 a.m. the next morning, federal preservation orders would convert to formal investigative subpoenas. And once subpoenas are issued, acceleration ends, control shifts. Adrian believed he was orchestrating a takeover. Vanessa believed she was accelerating wealth. Instead, they triggered oversight they cannot influence. And tomorrow, when agents walk into MedLedger's executive floor with official notices in hand, someone will finally understand the difference between optics and law. At exactly 6:03 a.m., the elevators opened on MedLedger's executive floor. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a soft mechanical glide. Agent Danielle Brooks walked in first, flanked by two federal officers carrying document cases. No sirens, no raised voices, just authority. That is what real power looks like. Quiet and irreversible. At 6:07 a.m., Adrian Keller's access badge was temporarily restricted pending review. He attempted to override it twice. The system denied both attempts. He stood in the hallway staring at the red light as if disbelief could change it. It could not. At 6:12 a.m., Vanessa arrived. She saw the officers before she saw the notice posted at the executive entrance, Records Preservation and Financial Conduct Review. Her expression did not shatter, it tightened. There is a difference. Shattering is emotional. Tightening is calculation. I was not physically present at the building. I did not need to be. The compliance dashboard mirrored every system movement to my secure archive at home. That is what happens when you design architecture yourself. If you are a woman watching this, remember, never rely on access you cannot audit. By 7 o'clock a.m., Elaine Whitcomb convened an emergency board call. Harrison Cole joined within seconds. His voice carried weight but not panic. "Proceed with full cooperation," he said. That sentence determined the trajectory of the company. Stability had chosen law over optics. At 7:32 a.m., Adrian requested legal representation formally. At 7:41 a.m., Vanessa's personal counsel contacted the board. She was positioning distance. Positioning is what people do when alliances fracture. At 8:15 a.m., Gabriel called me. His voice was no longer calm. "Mom, federal officers are in my office." There it was, the moment a son realizes governance is not abstract. "Yes," I said, silence. "Then, did you know?" I chose honesty without cruelty. "I anticipated." He exhaled sharply. "Adrian says this is procedural overreach." "Procedures only activate when triggered," I replied. "And who triggered it?" he asked quietly. I paused 1 second. "Access leaves fingerprints, Gabe." He understood, not fully yet. But enough. At 9 o'clock a.m., Agent Brooks began voluntary interviews. Adrian first. He maintained composure, framed restructuring as strategic modernization. Claimed offshore routing was consultative efficiency. He avoided definitive language, but he made one mistake. He described the 90-day inactivity clock as operationally necessary. That statement contradicted the ceremonial nature of my retirement filing. It established awareness. Awareness is intent. Vanessa's interview followed. She attempted emotional framing. "We were trying to protect growth." "Protect from what?" Brooks asked. Vanessa could not articulate a threat beyond stagnation. Stagnation is not a legal defense. At 11:30 a.m., Marcus Liu sent me updated tracing data. The offshore microtransfer attempted Sunday night was linked to a holding entity previously investigated in 2 minority dilution cases overseas. Pattern established. Patterns destroy plausible deniability. By noon, Rafael Cortez messaged, "Federal presence confirmed. Story will break by afternoon." Timing had arrived. "Release after confirmation of subpoena," I replied. Because narrative without paperwork becomes gossip. Narrative with subpoenas becomes record. At 1:14 p.m., the first subpoena was formally issued to MedLedger Analytics. Transactional data for the past 6 months. Device imaging for executive terminals. Adrian's hard drive was confiscated. The replacement unit he believed erased history now sat sealed in evidence. Teresa entered my study quietly at home. "Is it finished?" she asked. "No," I said, "now it begins." Consequences are not explosions, they are sequences. At 2:45 p.m., Harrison Cole called again. "Elena, this will impact market confidence." Always market confidence. "Short-term volatility," I said calmly. "Long-term preservation." He did not argue, he had seen enough documentation. At 3:30 p.m., Gabriel sent a message that took longer to answer than any before it. Did Vanessa know? That question was not about governance, it was about marriage. "She participated," I replied carefully, "not accusation, not absolution, just fact." He did not respond for 12 minutes, then. I need to come home? Yes, I said softly this time. Now you do, because leadership requires facing consequence in person. By 4:10 p.m., Raphael's article went live. Federal Review targets attempted share dilution at MedLedger. Neutral headline, document-backed, no sensationalism, just sequence. Investors reacted with brief volatility, then stabilization. Markets prefer clarity over rumor. At 5 p.m., Adrian's counsel released a statement denying intentional misconduct. The word intentional appeared twice. That is how defense teams prepare mitigation. Vanessa remained silent publicly. Silence can be strategic or stunned. By 6:20 p.m., Agent Brooks updated me. We have enough for formal charge consideration pending forensic confirmation. Her voice never rose above conversational tone. That calm is what terrifies professionals most, because it signals certainty. I closed my laptop slowly and walked onto the terrace. The sky was turning copper over the bay. 6 years ago, when my husband died, I believed the most difficult part of my life had already passed. I was wrong. The most difficult part was protecting what we built from those closest to it. If you are a woman watching this, understand something essential. Strength is not loud. It is consistent. It is written into systems. It waits. That evening, Gabriel's flight confirmation appeared in my inbox. He would land at 9:40 a.m. tomorrow. And when he steps into the boardroom, not as an idealistic CEO, but as a man who nearly lost his company to internal ambition, he will finally see what architecture protected him from. Adrian believed speed would secure control. Vanessa believed optics would secure wealth. Instead, their acceleration activated oversight they cannot outmaneuver. And tomorrow, when the forensic imaging results return from Adrian's confiscated hard drive, we will discover whether this was attempted manipulation or full conspiracy. And that difference will determine who walks into court and who walks free. Gabriel landed at 9:42 a.m. He did not go home first. He went straight to the office. That told me everything about the shift inside him. Idealism had been replaced with awareness. When he walked into the executive floor, the atmosphere no longer felt innovative. It felt audited. Agent Danielle Brooks had scheduled a secondary review session, this time with full forensic imaging results from Adrian Keller's confiscated hard drive. I was present physically now, not because I needed to be, but because my son did. Adrian sat at the far end of the conference table, posture rigid, counsel beside him. Vanessa sat 3 seats away, separated not formally but symbolically. Elaine Whitcomb had her legal pad open. Harrison Cole sat upright, hands folded, no longer neutral. Gabriel entered last. He looked older than he had a week ago. "Begin," he said quietly. Agent Brooks projected the forensic summary onto the screen. Device analysis confirms manual alteration of governance drafts prior to submission, she stated calmly. Metadata logs show backdated entries tied to user credentials assigned to Mr. Keller. Adrian did not interrupt. He knew interruption would look defensive. Brooks continued. Additionally, encrypted communications recovered from deleted cache indicate coordination regarding timing of majority share dilution during CEO absence. That sentence shifted the room. Timing during CEO absence. That meant Gabriel directly? My son's jaw tightened. Define coordination, Gabriel said. Brooks clicked to the next screen. Email fragments reconstructed from shadow memory. Adrian to Vanessa, window optimal while G abroad. Majority neutralization smoother without emotional pushback. Vanessa's face drained of color. Gabriel did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the screen. Brooks continued. Further analysis confirms offshore entity linkage designed to absorb diluted shares through layered consulting transfers. Marcus Liu had been correct. Pattern confirmed. Harrison exhaled slowly. This is not modernization, he said. No one disagreed. Adrian finally spoke. Strategic consolidation is not illegal. His tone remained controlled. Brooks replied evenly, strategic consolidation is not. Concealment and manipulation of fiduciary documentation is. Silence settled heavy. If you are a woman watching this, understand this moment. Truth does not shout. It sits in a room and waits for denial to collapse. Gabriel turned toward Adrian. You used my absence, he said, not anger, not yet, just recognition. Adrian leaned back slightly. Leadership transitions require decisiveness. I did not transition, Gabriel replied. That sentence mattered more than any accusation. Vanessa's hands trembled slightly against the table. We were protecting growth, she whispered. Gabriel finally looked at her. From what? He asked. She could not answer. Because growth was not under threat. Control was. Agent Brooks closed the presentation folder. Based on current evidence, we are proceeding with formal charges of attempted securities fraud and conspiracy to manipulate majority share control, she said. Calm, clinical, irreversible, Adrian's counsel leaned forward immediately. We dispute intent. Brooks nodded once. Intent is documented. And it was emails, transfers, backdating, device swaps, sequence forms intent. Harrison turned to Elaine. Board position? Elaine answered carefully. Immediate termination of Mr. Keller pending legal resolution. Suspension of any governance restructuring initiatives until full compliance audit concludes. Harrison nodded. Approved. Adrian stood slowly. You're making a mistake, he said, not loudly. Gabriel held his gaze. No, he replied quietly. I made a mistake when I trusted presentation over pattern. That was growth, not expansion growth. Personal growth? Vanessa remained seated as officers stepped forward toward Adrian. He did not resist. White-collar professionals rarely do. They believe argument still exists. But argument ends when documentation begins. As Adrian exited, he glanced once toward me, not with anger, with realization. He finally understood that the retired widow at the edge of the table had never been uninvolved. When the door closed behind him, the room exhaled collectively. But the hardest moment was still ahead. Gabriel turned to Vanessa. Was this about debt? He asked softly. She hesitated, then nodded once. I thought we'd lose everything if we didn't accelerate, she said. You leveraged our company to protect image, he replied. Not accusation, statement. She looked at me then. You could have warned me, she said quietly. I answered honestly, you could have asked. There is a difference between guidance and concealment. Harrison cleared his throat. MedLedger survives this, he said, but only if governance is restored visibly. Rafael Cortez's article was already trending in financial circles. Public narrative now aligned with documented action. That alignment protects valuation. Elaine addressed Gabriel. You will need to address the board and investors directly. He nodded. No hesitation this time. By 2:30 p.m., formal termination paperwork was signed. Adrian Keller was removed as chief financial strategist effective immediately, his access permanently revoked. Asset holds remained active pending legal proceedings. Vanessa's collateral accounts would undergo separate review. She was not charged at that moment, participation required further evaluation, but her leverage had dissolved. When the meeting adjourned, Gabriel remained seated. I stayed as well. Silence filled the boardroom. Finally, he spoke. You built safeguards I didn't even know existed. That was the point, I said gently. He looked at me differently now, not just as his mother. As the architect of his protection, I thought expansion was strength, he admitted. Structure is strength, I replied. If you are a woman watching this, remember, growth without structure invites exploitation. Structure without ego prevents collapse. That evening, Agent Brooks confirmed formal filing of charges against Adrian Keller for conspiracy and attempted securities fraud. Marcus Liu finalized the forensic audit trail. Elaine initiated governance reform updates. Harrison publicly reaffirmed board confidence in foundational leadership. And Gabriel drafted a letter to employees acknowledging the attempted manipulation and reaffirming transparency. Vanessa did not return home that night. She checked into a hotel, not exile, not punishment. Reflection, consequences do not always arrive in handcuffs. Sometimes they arrive in silence. As I stood by the office window overlooking the city lights, I allowed myself one private breath of relief. Not triumph, relief. Because what we built had survived internal ambition. But there is one final piece still unresolved. Because forensic analysis uncovered something Adrian did not anticipate. A communication chain suggesting he was not operating alone before joining MedLedger. And tomorrow, when Agent Brooks shares the external link they uncovered, this will expand beyond one strategist and reveal how close we truly came to losing everything. The final piece did not arrive with noise. It arrived as a quiet attachment at 6:18 a.m. from Agent Danielle Brooks. Subject line, External Correspondence, Keller Archive. I opened it alone in my study while the house was still dark. Inside the recovered data from Adrian Keller's hard drive was a thread labeled simply, Phase III. Phase III implied there had been Phase I and II elsewhere. The email chain traced back 18 months before Adrian ever joined MedLedger Analytics. He had been in communication with a private acquisition consortium specializing in transitional majority destabilization. Not one company, multiple. MedLedger was not a spontaneous opportunity. It was targeted. He positioned himself long before he applied, Marcus Liu said when I called him. His voice carried no surprise. He studied your share structure. Of course he did. Silent majority ownership attracts strategists who prefer quiet takeovers. If you are a woman watching this, understand this. Power that appears dormant becomes attractive to those who mistake stillness for weakness. At 9:00 a.m., Agent Brooks convened a final executive session. Gabriel sat beside me, Harrison Cole across from us, Elaine Whitcomb with a sealed folder. Teresa waited outside the room as she always does when history shifts. Brooks projected the external correspondence. Mr. Keller was recruited by a consolidation group specializing in leveraging founder absence, she stated evenly. MedLedger was categorized as emotionally led, structurally complacent. Gabriel inhaled sharply. Emotionally led, structurally complacent. Two miscalculations. We were neither, I said quietly. Brooks nodded. No, you were architecturally fortified. The external consortium had anticipated majority dilution within 6 months, followed by accelerated sale of controlling interest at inflated valuation. Vanessa's collateral leverage was identified in Keller's notes as pressure point. My son closed his eyes briefly. Betrayal layered deeper than internal ambition. It had been mapped, planned, sequenced. Harrison spoke first this time. How far did it reach? Brooks answered carefully. No evidence the consortium penetrated beyond Keller at MedLedger. Early detection prevented execution. Early detection, architecture worked. Elaine cleared her throat. Board recommendation, pursue civil recovery against Keller and cooperate fully with federal expansion of inquiry. Gabriel nodded without hesitation. Leadership had changed inside him, not hardened, clarified. Vanessa was not present. She had retained independent counsel and voluntarily submitted documentation of her debt leverage. Agent Brooks confirmed she would not face criminal charges absent evidence of external coordination, only financial penalties and regulatory review. Consequences but proportionate. Later that afternoon, Gabriel and I sat alone in the conference room overlooking the bay. They studied us, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. They believed expansion distracted governance. He looked at me. I thought delegation was strength. Delegation is strength, I said gently, without disengagement. There is a difference, he nodded slowly. I nearly lost what you and Dad built. You did not, I corrected, because structure remained. That is the lesson most founders learn too late. Personality builds companies, structure protects them. By evening, Rafael Cortez released his final investigative piece. Failed silent takeover exposes hidden consolidation network. The narrative did not center scandal. It centered architecture. That distinction preserved investor confidence and employee trust. Harrison issued a public statement reinforcing majority shareholder protections and governance reforms. Elaine formalized new board oversight protocols. Marcus completed the forensic audit trail. Agent Brooks confirmed federal expansion into the external consortium. And Adrian Keller, strategist, accelerator, modernizer, became a cooperating defendant in a broader securities investigation. Acceleration had led him not to control but to exposure. That night, Gabriel came home for the first time since returning from Zurich. Vanessa was not there. The house felt quieter than usual. Teresa prepared tea and withdrew discreetly. My son stood in the kitchen where he had once done homework while his father drafted compliance flowcharts beside him. I misread ambition, he said softly. Ambition without governance is appetite, I replied. Appetite consumes. He looked at me with something different now, not dependence, not rebellion, respect earned through evidence. You never confronted them, he said. Confrontation invites defense, I answered. Documentation invites consequence. If you are a woman watching this, remember this above all: you do not need to be louder to be stronger. You need to be prepared. Weeks passed. Market volatility stabilized. Employee confidence returned. Governance committees expanded. Vanessa began financial restitution proceedings and entered structured mediation with Gabriel. Their marriage would determine its own outcome, separate from corporate recovery. Consequences extend beyond balance sheets. One evening, as I stood on the terrace watching the water settle into dusk, Teresa joined me. "It is over," she asked gently. I considered the question. "The attempt is over," I said. "Vigilance is not. Because architecture must remain active. Complacency invites repetition." Months later, Agent Brooks informed me the external consortium had been formally charged in multiple jurisdictions. Adrian's correspondence had unlocked broader exposure. Phase III had never been completed. Because Phase I failed, and Phase I failed because someone they underestimated kept watching. I returned to my study and opened the founding charter once more. My husband's signature beside mine. The clause I inserted years ago. Majority control shall never be suspended without founder verification. They thought retirement erased verification. They forgot verification was systemic. My name is Alina Marquez. I am 63 years old, widow, mother, founder. Majority shareholder. They called me retired. They called me legacy. They called me inactive. But structure does not retire, it waits. And when access leaves fingerprints, someone must be disciplined enough to see them. What nearly happened to my son's company was not dramatic, it was procedural. And what saved it was not confrontation, it was preparation. So if you are building something, a business, a family, a future, build the architecture before you need it. Because when ambition comes disguised as modernization, the difference between loss and preservation will not be emotion, it will be structure. And structure, when written correctly, remains.